Javier, thank you very much, and thank you for that final note of optimism, because it's a long, slow process building Europe. And I think that sometimes when we all feel downcast and depressed about the state of the financial crisis or the interminable time it takes to get decisions made in the enlarged European Union, we lose sight of the fact that the longer process is underway. Now, I think we've got 10 minutes for some questions. And I wanted to ask a first one, if I may. Can I have a quick indication from the floor of anybody who'd like to ask questions? I think we've only time for sort of short questions. Anybody burning to ask questions, and I'll come back to you. I haven't seen any hands yet, but I am fairly short-sighted. Okay, well, wave at me during the next little bit of thing if there's somebody with something that they very much want to say. Javier, what I wanted to ask you was this. If you were to have a test case in the next decade of what would really reassure you that Europe was starting to build the sort of genuinely European foreign policy which you began the process of, what would it be? Would it be engagement with the Arab Spring and the Middle East on our doorstep? Would it be forging a really substantial and mutually profitable engagement with Russia? What's your touchstone for success?
Well, I think it would be very difficult to concentrate on one case. I think when we're talking about foreign policy, we don't know at this point in time what is going to be the landscape of the world in a few years. But we have touched two which are very, very important to define us, because are very close to our neighborhood. If we are not able to deal our neighborhood with this common sense and with in a productive manner, very difficult to go beyond our neighborhood. But you have touched about Russia. I think my test of our success with Russia will be to get the relation which is being started right now with the process or the agreement for the modernization of Russia, which is being discussed with them, to have it implemented. If we get that strategy that we have put on the table, that has been accepted by the Russians, to begin talking about it, but to get it done, it will be a very important test. Second thing, I think we have, this is not a specific European issue, but I would like to have European plus NATO, if I may say, to get resolved the question of missile defense. I think if we maintain this problem as an open problem, it will be a very, very dangerous situation for our relation with Russia. And that entails two more things that comes along with that. Comes the question of Ukraine. Ukraine are 85 million people, a failure. And we have to see, with this our neighbor, how we're going to deal with that country. It will be another thing. Now, if you look at the south, or to the south of the European Union, the question will be, how do we engage with the political Islam? We don't know what is going to be the political Islam still. But I think to have a solid engagement with the political Islam is absolutely fundamental to get a European Union which is stable in the southern flank. And for that, something I have not said, is absolutely crucial to have good relations with Turkey. So one of the other big challenges that we have in front of us is the engagement of the European Union with Turkey. And I don't want to go any further. What does it mean that? For the moment, it means membership. But in politics, I don't think it's an exaggeration, as I say today, that in the Middle East, in the Mediterranean, the broader Middle East, the diplomacy of Turkey is much more important than the diplomacy of the European Union. And it will probably continue to be so for some time. Therefore, if we want to have influence in that part of the world, and we have to, we need also the cooperation of Turkey. So Turkey is a very, very important country for us.
Okay, super. Let me put this to Mark, because Mark, you raised both Turkey and Russia as examples of, if you like, foreign policies where the European Union was still not getting it right. Do you think that would be, those two would be probably as good a touchstone of saying this is where Europe's got to have a much more sophisticated and substantial policy?
I think that those are the two key countries with whom we need to recraft a relationship which has much wider significance, because the way that we thought about European security was through a transatlantic prism. We thought that the EU and NATO would gradually enlarge and become security institutions for the whole of the European space. And what has become clear in the last few years is that that vision has reached its limits. NATO is not going to expand to include all the countries in the European space. The European Union is also not going to expand to include all the countries within the European space. And when we look out beyond our borders, whether it's to the Balkans, whether it's to the Black Sea, but above all, as Javier Solana said so eloquently, when we look south at our southern neighborhood, if we're dealing with problems like Syria, the key countries that we need to work with are Russia and Turkey. I have supported Turkish membership of the EU in the accession process, and I still think that that's one of the most exciting possible openings that the EU's had for a long time, the changes that have taken place within Turkey. But that is clearly not going to happen anytime soon, and so therefore we need to find a completely different way of engaging Turkey as a stakeholder for European security in parallel with the accession process. And Russia, we also need to not simply see as a country that can be transformed in the way that we transformed Central and Eastern Europe, but rather look at Russia as a stakeholder of European security and find a way of engaging it which meets its own aspirations for a bigger role within its own near abroad. And to do that in a way which doesn't compromise the sovereignty and the independence and the integrity, not just of EU member states, but of other important European countries like Ukraine. And that is a big project, which, if we get wrong, means that we could actually see the re-emergence of something which I thought we had left behind us, which is the idea of a multipolar Europe, where it is might that makes right within our space. But I think that's a short-term problem. For the longer term, I think the key is how we relate to China, because China is already emerging as a country which has the sort of ambitions and the scope to shape our world that the United States has had in the last few decades. And we still have a very out-of-date way of relating to China. We have 27 trade and investment policies towards China, but we don't have a commonly owned strategic vision which the big member states, the European institutions, and all of our potential leverage is put at the service of a common strategic vision.
But that's the whole point, isn't it? It's, the point is that China is, in the eyes of the big member states, too important to be left to Brussels. Now, I want to come back to Federico now. I mean, isn't the problem fundamentally for European foreign policy that, let me put it this way, I remember the late Richard Holbrooke saying to me, as long as Britain and France are permanent members of the UN Security Council, there will be no European common foreign policy. Was he too cynical?
Well, if we look at the latest crisis handled by the UN Security Council, as Javier mentioned, it doesn't seem particularly cynical. It seems pretty much a photograph of reality. You know, if we go over there split and divided and following different priorities, and we cannot rearrange these basic central, symbolically as well as materially central places of Europe's representation worldwide, I think the persistence of the past is going to dominate.
Okay. Javier, a last thought from you on China. Is China too important to be left to Europe? Or too important to be left to the individual member states?
China is very important, and so is Europe. And I think, as I said, the Chinese are not going to stop having relations with some member states or with all member states separately. But that does not prevent that the European Union as such has a relation very solid with the Russians, or with the Chinese. The Chinese don't want a G2 world. I think that is very clear. They have said it, they express it very clearly. They will prefer not to have that. Therefore, I think that in any way or another, being bilaterally or multilaterally, I hope it is multilaterally, the relation with the European Union will be clear. I mean, you mentioned the piece on the Financial Times the other day of the Deputy Prime Minister. It was very clearly what he said, and I think that is part of the truth that they have. It's not a public relations piece, I think.
Okay, well, look, I think that it's a long process. Javier, you spent 10 years of your life building it up. The whole exercise is now well underway, but it's going to be a long process. I want to thank the panel all very much because our next speaker, I think, President Barroso, is just about to arrive. So thank you all very much to the panel, and thank the panel, please, in the normal way. Thank you.